PL-600 Microsoft Certification Power Platform Solution Architect Question and Answer, Set 4. You are designing the data model for an inspection management app. The app will reference a defined list of inspection locations in Microsoft Dataverse and contain the latitude and longitude values. When users use the app, they must select a location. You need to identify the column data type for the location value. Which data type should you use? Option 1, Choice. Option 2, Choices. Option 3, Decimal number. Option 4, Lookup. Option 5, Text. Correct answers, Lookup. Explanation: this item tests the candidate's knowledge of the various Dataverse column types that are available and the design implications of looking up related data. Using a lookup value meets the scenario's requirements by allowing the location value and latitude and longitude values to be stored on the same row in a lookup table. Lookups can also be filtered by views and security roles, while localization can be performed on the location values using translation labels. A decimal number column can store only numeric values, which does not meet the stated requirements. A choice column provides an exact list of location values that users can choose from, but the requirements state the latitude and longitude must also be captured. Similarly, a choices column provides a multi-select pick list column where you can specify multiple values that will be available for users to select. The requirement states a single location must be selected, and a choices column also does not allow for the latitude and longitude coordinates to be stored. Text fields allow for free-form data entry, which could introduce locations outside the defined list. Text fields also will not accommodate the location's latitude and longitude values. You are designing the environment structure for a company's Microsoft Power Platform project. To optimize latency and user experience, you decide on the following: 1 development environment. 2 production environments, 1 in Europe and 1 in North America. You need to ensure it is always possible to deploy from the development environment to the downstream environments. Which region should you host the development environment in? Option 1, Canada. Option 2, Europe. Option 3, Japan. Option 4, North America. Correct answers, North America. Explanation: this item tests the candidate's knowledge of geolocation considerations in Microsoft Power Platform. A deployment into an environment with a newer version is always possible. A deployment into an environment with an older version as the source environment is unreliable and could lead to import errors. Therefore, your development environment should be in the North America region, which is Stage 5 of the Microsoft release train, to make sure the development environment always has an older or the same version as all downstream environments. Europe is Stage 4 of the Microsoft release train. If the development environment was in Europe, it might cause issues when deploying to the test or production environments, which are hosted in the North America region, because the target environment version is older than the one in the source environment. It is the same situation for Canada and Japan because both are earlier stages in the release train. Canada is Stage 2 and Japan is Stage 3. You are designing the security model for a Microsoft Dataverse solution for a global company. The model must meet the following requirements. All users must be able to access the same Dataverse environment. Data access requirements must be structured based on country/region and then department. Data must be accessed only by standard users within their specific department. Senior users must have the ability to access data across multiple departments and at the country/region level. You need to recommend which platform feature to use. What should you recommend? Option 1, Access Teams. Option 2, Business Units. Option 3, Owner Teams. Option 4, Security Roles. Correct answers, Business Units. Explanation: this item tests the candidate's knowledge of designing an appropriate business unit structure. Business units provide a logical grouping of users and records within a Dataverse environment. With this structure, standard users in specific countries/regions can be prevented from accessing data in another country/region. The structure also ensures the senior users can access data hierarchically within the regional business unit. Security roles control the discrete privileges assigned to users within a Dataverse environment. Using these roles will not ensure the hierarchical access requirements can be met. Access teams specify the set of privileges that can be granted to a specific group of users on a per-record basis. Using access teams will not ensure the hierarchical access requirements can be met. Owner teams can be used to assign specific records in the system to multiple users at the same time. Using owner teams will not ensure the hierarchical access requirements can be met. You are finalizing the role concept for a Microsoft Power Platform project for a company. Members of the IT staff must be able to manage all environments on the tenant. This includes the ability to take backups and create new environments as needed. Corporate policy dictates that all environments must be linked to a security group. You need to recommend the appropriate role for the IT staff using the principle of least privilege. Which role should you assign? Option 1, Global Admin. Option 2, Microsoft Dynamics 365 Admin. Option 3, Microsoft Power Platform Admin. Option 4, System Administrator role in all environments. Correct answers: Microsoft Power Platform Admin. Explanation: this item tests the candidate's knowledge of roles and admin accounts. The Microsoft Power Platform Admin role gives users the ability to manage all Microsoft Power Platform environments on the tenant, including the ability to create and backup environments. It is the most appropriate and least privileged role to grant for the scenario. The Global Admin role in Microsoft 365 provides the most excessive privileges across the tenant, including the ability to manage all Microsoft Power Platform environments. It is generally advised to curtail the usage of this role, and assigning this role would not adhere to the principle of least privilege. The Dynamics 365 admin role traditionally has been used to maintain Microsoft Power Platform environments. However, the role is now deprecated, meaning its usage is discouraged. There is also the requirement that the users in question can manage all environments. This role would only allow them to manage the environments if they are a member of the corresponding security group. Granting the system administrator role on a per-environment level ensures the organization can adhere to the principle of least privilege. But because the users in question have the requirement to manage all environments on the tenant, this role would not give them the minimum level of privileges they require. You are gathering requirements for a financial company that has complex security requirements. The company uses Active Directory on-premises as its primary identity provider. The company has not used any Microsoft Cloud services previously and does not use a federated identity solution. After gathering the requirements, you determine that all users must access the Microsoft Power Apps Maker portal using Single Sign-On (SSO). You need to recommend the appropriate architecture. Your solution must minimize administrative overhead. What should you recommend? Option 1, Microsoft Entra ID Connect. Option 2, Microsoft Entra ID. Option 3, Active Directory Federation Services, ADFS. Option 4, Cloud-Only Identities. Correct answers: Microsoft Entra ID Connect. Explanation: this item tests the candidate's knowledge of the Microsoft Power Platform security model and how to reconcile it against a complex set of requirements. To streamline and simplify an SSO deployment, Microsoft Entra ID Connect can be deployed to synchronize on-premises Active Directory identities with their corresponding Microsoft Entra ID objects. Once implemented, this can then be extended to support SSO. For organizations that already use a Federated Identity Service, ADFS may be the most appropriate option to consider. In the context of the scenario, however, introducing this component could result in significant administrative complexity and cost, which needs to be avoided. Using cloud-only identities would mean that users must re-authenticate every time they access Microsoft Power Platform services. This would not meet the requirements for SSO. Although Microsoft Entra ID B2B can be used in conjunction with specific Microsoft Power Platform services, such as a Power Pages site, it is not an appropriate identity provider for accessing and managing various Microsoft Power Platform sites, such as the Maker portal, which is what the scenario requires. You are implementing a Microsoft Power Platform solution. You need to collect information from user stories to complete the fit/gap analysis. Which two pieces of information should you collect for each user story? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Option 1, estimate. Option 2, level of effort. Option 3, priority. Option 4, related user stories. Option 5, stakeholders. Correct answers, level of effort a priority. Explanation: this item tests the candidate's knowledge of a fit/gap analysis. The information needed from user stories for a fit/gap analysis are priority and level of effort. The priority factor prioritizes items against each other. This is needed because the outcome of a fit/gap analysis should be a prioritized and sized list of items to implement. The level of effort determines how much work is required for an item and is a needed piece of information for the fit/gap analysis. Although it is important to know who the stakeholders are, this information is not needed for a fit/gap analysis. An estimate is a more realistic guess of how much time a work item will take, usually in hours, days, or story points. To create a proper estimate, you would need to dig deeper into a user story, and this is not needed during a fit/gap analysis. You do not need to know what the related user stories are to perform a fit/gap analysis. You are implementing a solution based on Microsoft Power Platform. You are planning an integration with a third-party system by using Microsoft Power Automate. The system provides a RESTful API. You need to determine the first step in the integration. What is the first step you should perform? Option 1, verify whether there is a certified connector for the system. Option 2, verify whether there is an open-source connector for the system. Option 3, create a custom connector for the system. Option 4, write an Azure function to integrate with the system. Correct answers: verify whether there is a certified connector for the system. Explanation: this item tests the candidate's knowledge of the process of analyzing whether Microsoft Power Platform has a specific capability. For this scenario, you should first check whether there is already a certified connector for the identified system. If there is not one, you should check for an open-source connector. If you cannot find an open-source connector, you could begin creating your own custom connector. An Azure function to integrate with another system is nearly always an option. But for this scenario, there is an easier and faster way that you should take first. You are part of a team working on a Microsoft Power Platform project. A functional consultant on the team reports issues with a one-to-many (1EN) relationship that is configured in Microsoft Dataverse. Related rows in the table are left orphaned in the system instead of being deleted. The behavior for share and assign works as expected. You need to recommend a solution to the problem. Which type of relationship behavior should you advise the functional consultant to use? Option 1, custom. Option 2, parental. Option 3, referential. Option 4, referential, restrict, delete. Correct answers: custom. Explanation: this item tests the candidate's knowledge of working with relationships and the different cascading behaviors available. The behavior type custom would allow the functional consultant to change the delete action type while still retaining the desired action for share and assign. Based on this scenario, you can determine that referential is the currently configured behavior type. Changing the behavior type to parental would not solve the problem because the current actions of share and assign are working as expected. These actions would be changed to cascade all if the behavior type were set to parental. Changing the behavior type to referential, restrict, delete would also not solve the problem because although the share and assign actions would still work as expected, the user would be prevented from deleting a parent row if any child rows exist. You are performing a discovery with an energy company. The company wants to create a connected worker app that can be used to perform equipment inspections. The app must meet the following requirements. Runs on a heavy-duty device. Has UI with a simple layout and large buttons and fields. Is available for workers who are working offline. Supports inspection data that is integrated from SAP. You need to identify the appropriate app type to support the requirements. Which app type should you select? Option 1, Portal. Option 2, Canvas. Option 3, Model Driven. Option 4, Microsoft Teams. Correct answers: Canvas. Explanation: this item tests the candidate's knowledge of identifying an organization's existing business processes and mapping the requirements and data sources to the appropriate Power Apps app. A Canvas app provides the flexible and customizable interface needed to create the inspection app with an easy-to-follow layout and large buttons and fields. A Canvas app also will support going offline, will work across heavy-duty devices, and will connect to various data sources such as SAP. Model-driven apps are built using predefined components, such as forms, views, and dashboards, which are automatically generated based on the data model in Dataverse. The requirements state the app will be based on data in SAP and require a highly personalized UI, which does not fit model-driven apps. Portal apps are designed to create external-facing websites or portals. They are driven by Dataverse data and use model-driven forms and views as a framework to show Dataverse data. Therefore, a portal app does not meet the stated requirements. The Microsoft Teams app is a productivity companion app used as a collaboration platform and hub to bring together chat, video meetings, file storage, and app integration in one interface. The Microsoft Teams app is not configurable like a Power Apps app is and, therefore, will not meet the stated requirements. You are preparing for the go-live of a Microsoft Power Platform solution to replace an existing business system. The project stakeholders agree on a time for all migration activities to take place. The stakeholders also decide on a hypercare period to deal with urgent issues. You need to ensure the go-live proceeds as planned. What should you do? Option 1. Begin user training for the solution. Option 2. Start testing the solution. Option 3. Ensure the availability of project team members. Option 4. Disable access to the system that is being replaced. Correct answers: ensure the availability of project team members. Explanation: this item tests the candidate's knowledge of deployment planning. It is important that the critical members of the project team are available as part of key go-live activities. A solution architect will be expected to be available and very often will be the first point of contact if any issues occur. User training, although important, should be done well in advance of any system go-live because adoption and satisfaction can be affected severely if you commence user training following the go-live of a solution. Testing of any solution should take place either throughout the current work iteration or sprint or as part of a dedicated phase of the project. This should be completed well in advance of any go-live and is not a strict dependency. Access to any existing systems should ideally be maintained for a minimum period during and after any go-live because situations may arise where access is still required. The immediate revocation of access to these systems could cause business disruption. You are preparing requirements for a Microsoft Power Platform project. You need to ensure all requirements can be tested. What should you include in the requirements? Option 1. Who needs the requirement? Option 2. The purpose of the requirement. Option 3. The acceptance criteria for the requirement. Option 4. The intended outcome of the requirement. Correct answers: the acceptance criteria for the requirement. Explanation: this item tests the candidate's knowledge of structuring requirements correctly. Acceptance criteria provide the primary mechanism to ensure a requirement can ultimately be satisfied. Although it is useful in other respects, acceptance criteria is typically relied upon by testing teams as they attempt to evaluate whether a requirement has been implemented correctly. Testing teams use acceptance criteria when compiling test cases. Establishing who needs the requirement will identify the target audience or a persona who will benefit from the requirement after it has been implemented. However, determining who needs the requirement will not provide any criteria to allow testing teams to validate whether the requirement has been implemented correctly. Establishing the purpose of the requirement identifies the business reason or benefit to be realized after the requirement has been implemented. This is typically not useful for testing teams because it does not provide the required level of detail to assess against. Establishing the intended outcome of the requirement identifies the task or action that the requirement will seek to resolve. This will typically be connected to a business process or the target audience, which does not provide the low-level details needed to assist in testing a requirement. You are reviewing JavaScript code that a developer wrote for a Microsoft Power Platform project. You observe that the developer implemented the code by using retrieve multiple calls to retrieve a single row from a Microsoft Dataverse table. The code retrieves data using a secondary key from an external system. You need to recommend an approach to simplify the code. What should you recommend the developer use? Option 1, an alternate key. Option 2, the $expand query parameter. Option 3, a fetch XML query. Option 4, the $filter query parameter. Correct answers, an alternate key. Explanation: this item tests the candidate's knowledge of alternate keys and their potential usage cases in Dataverse. Based on the scenario, the developer could use an alternate key to change the retrieve multiple call into a single retrieve action, thereby greatly simplifying the code. Alternate keys provide a mechanism for developers to interact with a single table row in a Dataverse environment in situations where the row's GUID value is not known. This can be useful for integration scenarios involving secondary key values. Using a fetch XML query would not be appropriate and could potentially complicate the code even further. Fetch XML is the proprietary querying language for the Dataverse platform and is typically used for more complex scenarios where multiple rows need to be returned. It is not an appropriate tool to use to retrieve a single scalar row. Using either the $filter or $expand query parameter would also not be appropriate in this scenario. The $filter query parameter is typically used to return numerous rows and is not an appropriate parameter to use to retrieve a single scalar row. The $expand parameter helps to retrieve related attributes to the current row in a streamlined manner. You are validating a model-driven app that a developer implements. The developer used JavaScript on the account form to hide or show sensitive columns based on user input. You need to explain the core security issue of this design to the developer. What should you explain to the developer? Option 1, app-level security is restricting access to the app. Option 2, form-level security is limiting certain security groups access to the account form. Option 3, account data is being saved outside Microsoft Dataverse. Option 4, the data is insecure and can be accessed from other places in the app. Correct answers: the data is insecure and can be accessed from other places in the app. Explanation: this item tests the candidate's knowledge of setting up and validating the security layers available in Microsoft Power Platform. In the scenario, the developer used JavaScript to hide and show sensitive columns on a form. This does not truly implement platform-level security, however. It is an example of client-side scripting. A solution architect should be concerned by the use of JavaScript because the developer is not securing the data, and users can still access the data in other ways, such as with advanced find or edit in Excel Online. App-level security would be enforcement at the platform level and would restrict access to the entire app. There is no indication that app-level security is being used or that this is a security concern. With form-level security, you can allow only specific security groups to access specific forms within a model-driven app. Form-level security is useful if you want to restrict by job role how people enter or view data. It is clear in this scenario that the developer has not taken this approach and that a security concern has been introduced elsewhere. All model-driven app data is stored and surfaced from Dataverse, including the account data that is stored in a standard table. You are working on a Microsoft Power Platform implementation. The implementation must meet the following requirements. The name of a table row must remain the same when a row is changed or created. Rows must be named according to specified rules. The calculated name must appear immediately after a user saves a row. You need to determine the processing approaches to use in the implementation. Which two processing approaches should you select? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Option 1, asynchronous. Option 2, client-side. Option 3, server-side. Option 4, synchronous. Correct answers: server-side, synchronous. Explanation: this item tests the candidate's knowledge of how custom code can be pre-processed. As required in the scenario, for users to receive immediate feedback after they save a row, the code must calculate the name synchronously. If you use an asynchronous approach, the calculation will not be received immediately. Server-side processing is also required for the scenario because the naming must remain the same every time, no matter how the row was created. When a calculation is processed on the server side, it will apply to integrations as well. Only with this approach can you ensure you always use the same logic to calculate the name. When the calculation is processed on the client side, the calculation of the name will not apply to the integration. As a result, the integration will not use the same naming logic. You are working on a Microsoft Power Platform project for a company. The company has yet to define its overall objectives as part of the project. You need to identify a key success criterion for the project. What should you identify? Option 1, allocate 100% of the project's budget. Option 2, increase new customer onboarding time by 10%. Option 3, reduce annual IT expenditure by 15%. Correct answers: reduce annual IT expenditure by 15%. Explanation: this item tests the candidate's knowledge of evaluating and proposing key success criteria for a project. Identifying customer pain points and establishing a comprehensive outcome for a project that can be measured accurately are vital to ensure the success of the solution can be determined after delivery. These success criteria should be identified and captured as early as possible during the project lifecycle. For this scenario, reducing IT expenditure by 15% represents a comprehensive outcome and, therefore, a success criterion. Fully consuming the budget for a project does not address a pain point or save money for an organization. As much as possible, efficiencies should be identified and realized to avoid fully consuming a project's budget. Increasing new customer onboarding times does not address a pain point in the organization because this will likely lead to customer frustration. You are working on a Microsoft Power Platform project that involves several integrations built by developers and several environments. Each environment has separate endpoints for each integration. As part of testing and planning for the go-live, the project team informs you that many activities are time-consuming and prone to error. You need to identify which key activities can be automated to streamline efforts. Which 2 activities can you automate? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Option 1, connection management. Option 2, service endpoint configuration. Option 3, team records creation. Option 4, upsert of reference data. Option 5, webhook configuration. Correct answers: team records creation, upsert of reference data. Explanation: this item tests the candidate's knowledge of planning the go-live and automating key activities. The configuration migration tool can be used to automate the migration of references and other table data between Dataverse environments. The tool can be run manually or also triggered automatically via Microsoft Power Platform CLI and Azure pipelines in Azure DevOps. For this reason, the configuration migration tool can be used to update reference data between environments and to automate the creation of team records in a target Dataverse environment. Configuring service endpoints that target Azure resources and webhook-based integrations must be done manually via the plugin registration tool. It is not possible to automate their creation if each environment has different URLs for these endpoints. Managing connections used for flows and apps can be automated to a limited extent via connection references, but the creation of the underlying connections must always be done manually. There is no option or capability to automate this. You are working on a Microsoft Power Platform project. Developers are developing similar functionality and interfaces across each Microsoft Power Apps Canvas app. You need to recommend how to eliminate this duplication of effort. Which 2 features should the developers use? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Option 1, .ms app files. Option 2, Canvas components. Option 3, HTML web resources. Option 4, Microsoft Power Apps Component Framework Controls. Correct answers: Canvas components, Microsoft Power Apps Component Framework Controls. Explanation: this item tests the candidate's knowledge of identifying opportunities and features that promote component reuse. Canvas components allow makers to create reusable building blocks that can be used across different Microsoft Power Apps Canvas apps. Canvas components provide an ideal opportunity to reuse components and to reduce the amount of development effort when building multiple apps. Microsoft Power Apps Component Framework Controls allow developers to create reusable code components that can be used in Microsoft Power Apps and Microsoft Power Pages. Microsoft Power Apps Component Framework Controls provide an ideal opportunity for reusability and to reduce the amount of development effort when building multiple apps. Using an .ms app file for a Canvas app through exporting and importing is not an efficient mechanism for replicating Canvas app functionality due to the steps involved and additional development effort required in each new application. An HTML web resource can be used to replicate functionality and interfaces across different applications. However, they can be used only in model-driven apps. You are working on a Microsoft Power Platform project. During planning for the current sprint, the project team creates a list of requirements for the next build effort. You need to verify that the requirements are technically accurate. Which requirement should you identify as technically accurate? Option 1. A custom stored procedure must be run within Microsoft Dataverse. Option 2. A Cloudflow automation must be run synchronously. Option 3. A model-driven app must be created for external users by using Microsoft Entra ID. Option 4. A Microsoft Power BI visualization must be embedded within a Canvas app. Correct answers. A Microsoft Power BI visualization must be embedded within a Canvas app. Explanation. This item tests the candidate's knowledge of confirming the technical accuracy of requirements. Power BI visualizations can be embedded easily into different Canvas Power apps, which makes this a technically valid requirement. Dataverse as a software as a service (SaaS) platform does not support the ability for users to access the underlying Microsoft SQL Server database and create stored procedures. This represents a requirement that is not technically accurate. All cloud flows within Microsoft Power Automate must run asynchronously. This represents a requirement that is not technically accurate. Classic workflows are the only automation that can run synchronously. Model-driven apps can be run only by internal users existing on the current Microsoft Entra ID tenant. To meet the requirement in this scenario, Microsoft Power Pages would need to be implemented instead. You are working on a Microsoft Power Platform project. The solution requires a custom Microsoft Power BI visual. You need to recommend a solution to implement the visual using the least amount of effort. What should you recommend? Option 1. Create a .bivs file. Option 2. Implement an R-based visual. Option 3. Use a Microsoft AppSource visual. Option 4. Write code for a Python-based visual. Correct answers. Use a Microsoft AppSource visual. Explanation. This item tests the candidate's knowledge of using AppSource to address gaps in Power BI. When evaluating and addressing gaps in any Microsoft Power Platform solution, AppSource should be the first destination a solution architect goes to for solutions. Microsoft, an independent software vendor, ISV, partners deploy many different solutions on AppSource that target different industries, use cases, and scenarios. Finding a solution on AppSource can eliminate the need for any custom development work. Although it is possible for developers to build a custom visual by using R or Python or by authoring a .bivs file by using TypeScript, this often requires dedicated knowledge and effort to deploy a working solution. Custom development should be avoided when a solution is already available. You are working on a Microsoft Power Platform project. You are applying Agile principles to the project. During sprint planning, you observe that a requirement that involves integration with a single ERP system now includes additional business systems. These systems have yet to be analyzed. You need to determine the appropriate action to take regarding the requirement. What should you do first? Option 1. Revise the requirement. Option 2. Create a user story for the requirement. Option 3. Add the requirement to the next sprint. Option 4. Perform an evaluation of the requirement. Correct answers. Perform an evaluation of the requirement. Explanation. This item tests the candidate's knowledge of identifying and handling scope creep in requirements. If a requirement begins to change or develop from its original assumptions, this should be discussed and reviewed as soon as possible. By doing so, all stakeholders on the project can evaluate how to handle this, including if other actions need to occur, such as a change request. Adding the requirement to the next sprint with the changes included will almost certainly result in scope creep because the effect of these changes has not been evaluated properly and could affect project timelines and estimates. Revising a requirement without first discussing and reviewing it with the wider project team is not appropriate because there might be wider business effects that need to be considered. In addition, the new requirement might be important enough that it needs to be delivered as part of the solution. Creating a new user story for the requirement to describe the additional changes will almost certainly result in scope creep because the effect of these changes has not been properly evaluated and could affect project timelines and estimates.